I have in front of me a document that I have written down some notes and answers on for a list of questions that was asked to me on the YouTube community post because I was snaking them into providing me free YouTube content. I thought that would be the best way to do this. So we should probably start with the questions that I do have in front of me here. And we'll go from there. So hello, YouTube. I have answers for all of your questions, at least the 5 that I was given. So we're gonna start with number 1. From Bruce M. How much do you prep typically for a campaign session? How much room do you leave for improv? Is it more having an entire session with multiple scenarios planned, or rough encounters and story details with the players left to fill in the rest, or somewhere in between? Kind of covered a lot of different ground there. But for me, planning has will vary greatly depending on what game or what show, especially if it's like between private games or show games. I focused on this answer a little bit on like the show end of things. I tend to do much more planning and prep for shows. Of course, specifically homebrew things like the Ruin series, between asset creation, NPCs, locations, worlds. Like homebrew obviously takes a significantly more amount of time than just like running a module that I changed some stuff on. For shows, I spent about 2 to 3 hours preparing for them. More so for Ruin. For Ruin, I spent like days prepping on. May and I spent literal months, and we'll be spending 2 months at least preparing season 2 for Ruin. Like it's like a whole damn thing. Running a module and something like that, I'll prepare day of, give it a few hours. But like, if I'm running stuff for a professional game, I'll prepare for about an hour, depending on what game it is and like what scenario they're in. I'll prepare about an hour. The game tonight, I just ran one. I have a Monday night crew that I run. They only play for 2 hours. They play every Monday. I did nothing because where we left off last, they dropped an entire elevator, a giant-sized elevator, down into the hornet's nest. So the entirety of this 2 hours was just going to be them fending off wave after wave of giants and things because they decided to jump literally head first into the hornet's nest. So there's occasionally times that there's nothing to like prepare for. It's whatever you're going to do, right? But for shows, it's much more specific because there are story beats and things that I need to hit in 3 hours. There are things that need to happen in a 3-hour time frame, and there needs to be planned breathing room in each of the shows for role play between those beats. And then you prepare for the what ifs the best that you can. What if they go this way? What if they stab this guy? What if they trick Archon the Cruel and turn a Titan back into its true form and begin an unwinnable battle? You know? What if they explode an NPC? Poor Clem, rest in peace, my dude. Some of those things are impossible to plan for, and that's where I find myself improvising the most, obviously, is like when they just go off whatever the little story beat is, that's all improvised. There have been entire episodes that are completely improvised other than the map that is on the screen. I will tell you that much because we go one direction, I'm like, fuck, I didn't plan for that. We're okay, here we go. But for shows in general, there are story beats or moments that I want to hit that are pre-planned. Those things change from time to time, like while we play, but that's generally how that works. I leave the players to fill in the chaos, to role play their people. I try to push that with NPCs, like asking questions and pushing role play. But as much as I do prepare, even for things like Ruin and stuff like that, I find myself improvising at least half of all of the content, especially NPC interactions, right? Like all the role play that is done from me to them, that's all improv. That's like 100%. There's like there are very few pre-planned moments that I've had with players off screen where I go, hey, we're going to do this today. Examples of that is like Hugo's time warp portal. And like we talked about that outside and that was prepped, but like how that was introduced, how that was rolled into the game and stuff like that. I mean, that was just me. I had ideas for that and I kind of just pushed it into the right direction at the right times. Yeah, I think that answers a lot of that there. Any other questions about prep from the live Twitch chat? Smile. My big thing with prepping is knowing as much about the world as possible and as much about my BBEGs as possible. I feel like I can wing most things. Right, well, because if you have structure of the world, how the world reacts to things that happen to it, then it's much easier to improvise things on the fly because you know what the next step is going to be. When you prep combats, do you go off CR or what your player skills and strengths are? Absolutely player skills and strengths. CR is a good basis. And the way that many of my groups play, shows and otherwise, if you want a meaningful combat, you basically plan for deadly and they're going to treat it like hard. And that's about it. And I can tell you many, many times in combat scenarios, I've absolutely changed stats on the fly for monsters or whatever to either increase, decrease the scale of the combat. And the reason I think that's okay for the way that I run games is because I do not use an XP system. I think that's a really big point. I do not like using an experience system. I don't like having the players mandatorily go hit things with a stick so they can get their big star level up, right? Hate that. It's awful. Milestone only. Milestone only. You hit the big story beats, you move on to this certain spot, and I've already got in my head, like, this is where they're gonna hit this is where they're gonna hit this is where they're gonna do this. And if it takes you 1,000 years to get there, then it takes 1,000 years to get there. And maybe I'll introduce a level up in the meantime if you go do something else that's cool and fun. Nice little side quest, right? But like, I don't want them to go stab every merchant to like pick up 5 XP. I don't know how like most people feel about that nowadays. I know there was a lot back when I started playing Dungeons and Dragons. A lot of people really disliked that I did milestone. They really wanted that like number, that XP number. It's like, I hate that so much. It's awful, especially in shows. It's a problem in shows mostly because that means every episode there has to be a combat, right? Like you feel like in every 3 hours you have to have a combat and it eats up so much time. I also do XP for finishing quests, but that's a milestone. Finishing quests is a milestone. It's not combat XP, right? That's a milestone. It's just a different way of implementing it, right? Those are minor milestones. You finish a specific quest, right? Like let's say let's call it a side quest, and oh, cool, they get XP for that. If you do the numbers with it, whatever, it's still a milestone. Still, it's not combat XP, and I think that's what's important. Playing for deadly, they'll treat it like hard is some of the best advice I've heard. That's how I've always run my combat. It's been super well received. Yeah, because you want combat to feel meaningful, right? It has to have a purpose. I have had 3 groups come to me to like run games for them because they felt like either they as a DM or their at-home DMs were basically just like DMing. Like it takes a lot of time and prep and patience and like you have to want to do it because it is a job. It's work. It's work. And so sometimes that like there was groups that felt like their DM at home was padding a lot of the things that they were doing with just random encounters. Random combat encounters, because it meant that you don't. Combat means you do not have to prep more of the world, the space, the role play, or the next thing. You can insert a combat encounter and eat an hour of time, or for some high level stuff, you can eat up to 3 hours or higher of time, right? So it's an easy way to just pad a scenario and just have it take time. In shows, like that's why combat you have to be really careful about, is because it will eat your entire show. It'll eat the whole thing. It's gone, right? Like that 3 hours, you have one combat encounter, that's break. It may go through break, and then the show's over. That's a whole episode, and you've gone nowhere. And people like, there are some people that like watching 3 hours worth of combat, but most people don't even watch the first 30 minutes of any episode. So it's tough. And like a show space, like it's real tough. You have to be very careful about combat. Question 2 here was from Sean Thomas, who says, I'm learning a Scots accent for a character. I'm going to power through the painful moments when it's utterly awful. I hope to be a better Scotsman on the other side. Are there any characters that you've gone the extra length to make and embarrassed yourself entirely? My first thing is, good, embarrass yourself. Yes, take your risk on character voices. I love it. God, I wish more of my players use character voices. I want all of them to use character voices. It adds so much to like the role play of the character and helps me as a DM differentiate between what is just table talk and what is in character speech. I don't care if it's good. I don't care if it's bad. I think it helps people get into character and actually role play something. My biggest one is like, I've got some really smart guys that like play Their role play generally comes down to, I just want to roll a persuasion die. Man, I get that. But like specifically in shows and stuff like this, like I really want people to play the role play. It's a show. So I really appreciate when players go that, like, just that little extra to even just have a bad accent while they play in character. I love it. I love it so much. It's so great. And the thing is, like, everyone sucks at doing it in the beginning. I sucked in the beginning. I was awful. Ars can attest to this in the chat right now. I could not hold a singular accent for any length of time. I couldn't fucking do it at all. Most of my accents are still vaguely European, and then I pitch them up, down, or add some effect like making them more airy or gravelly or whatever, because that's the easiest ones for me to grab onto. But then you just keep doing it. Just keep going. Practice in the car or in the shower or whatever, man. Just like do it. The thing I want to do most is spend more time on is actually studying and practicing specific accents. So right now, all of mine are like vaguely European or like vaguely Southern or country or vaguely Russian, right? Like Eastern European. They're all kind of like in an area of some kind, but none of them are like specifically an accent. Yeah, and I think I would want to spend more time on doing it. The issue is that takes time. It takes so much time. Specifically things like Scottish. Much like Sean Thomas has said here, I'm terrible at doing a Scottish accent. I cannot hold on to it more than 2 sentences. Then I completely lose it. I absolutely cannot do it. So that's one of the biggest things. And even like Australian-esque English, can't do it either. I spent the most effort developing Reko. Reko was my first Russian accent character that I played in Cyprus, and by extension, Ishmael. It's not accurate. It's not actually representative of any particular Eastern European or Russian area. It was very far outside my comfort zone at the time. I felt really good about how it turned out. And yeah, I think getting into accents feels so intimidating at first. It is. And my advice to you is, we all sucked at one point. I still do. Just do it. And preface it to the table, be like, hey, I really want to try an accent for this character. I really want to get into the role play this time. And just do it. Just do it. Just do it.